Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content. Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at an extremely notorious Liverpool crime family that has even been made the subject of a television documentary, the Fitzgibbon family. The family includes brothers Mr. Jason Fitzgibbon and Mr. Ian Fitzgibbon, who are involved in an international drug trafficking ring. Their mother, Miss Christine Fitzgibbon, is also believed to be a crucial mastermind in the criminal undertakings of the family. Mr. Daniel Smith was a noteworthy associate of the Fitzgibbons. The patriarch of the family was Mr. Billy Fitzgibbon, also known as Mr. William Fitzgibbon, who agreed by most scholars had lower authority and power in the family of crime. Mr. Jason, in particular, was identified as the family hard man, who was happy to dish out violence when necessary. Jason and Mr. Smith had attacked a car dealer in Wiston, who he had blamed for not coming up with a motor on time. Carlisle Crown Court heard that Mr. Jason first approached the car dealer about buying a BMW X5 4x4 for his girlfriend, but when the dealer could not find the right car, Jason became angry. He said, "You've let my bird down. I'll show you what happens when you let people down. I'll meet up with you and I'll cut you from ear to ear. Don't treat me like an idiot. When I say I'll do something, I'll do it." The dealer agreed to meet Mr. Smith near the village hotel in Wiston, but when he arrived, he was jumped by a group of men wearing balaclavas and then stabbed. Mr. Smith and Mr. Jason Fitzgibbon later admitted to GBH. Edale Road was the home of Miss Christine Fitzgibbon, who surprisingly did not have a criminal record. But the extent of the role she played by the doting grandma shocked and surprised detectives. She claimed benefits whilst living the high life through her son's drug business. Christine was an expert on advising her sons on how to avoid the law, and how she could work out exchange rates for European drug deals at the drop of a hat. She was described as a sophisticated businesswoman who knew when to make the deal and when to hold. Christine is the real matriarch of the family. She is the thing that binds them and bonds them. She resolves internal disputes, and everything revolves around her. It was apparent that Christine in effect schooled her children from an early age on how to disregard the laws of the land. The family were determined to amass a criminal fortune. The family revelled in their notoriety. The humongous Fitzgibbon crimes family gaudy mansion in Liverpool paid for by a £3.2 million global drug dealing network. Jason Fitzgibbon was from Crofton Mansions, North Sudley Road, Liverpool, while Mr. Ian from Higham Gardens, St Helens. What we're talking about here is a family who have held a very tight rein on areas of Liverpool for a number of years. They thought they were untouchable. Their motive, just financial greed, and greed in terms of their status and notoriety. Noting the sophistication of the operation, if they were to have channeled their thoughts and efforts into a legitimate business, they'd be very wealthy individuals. What we have here is a criminal family running a criminal business. Mum, very much the company director, finance director and consultant. Father, a consultant advisor to the two brothers and the brothers' very hands-on managing directors involved in source countries and face-to-face meetings. Jason Fitzgibbon was in charge of transport, whilst Ian Fitzgibbon, aged 39, was in charge of logistics. Mum, as the finance director, would be well aware of the exchange rate between the euro and the pound, being in charge of laundering the money. She would be aware of the impact of that in any importation. She's very acutely aware of the police's tactics and would advise her sons on forensic strategies and ways to avoid detection. On paper, Miss Christine was an unemployed housewife who, with her husband William, collected £1,500 in benefits each month. The Fitzgibbon clan dealt in violence, money and drugs for more than a decade and amassed a fortune, yet claimed thousands of pounds in benefits. They've been described to as akin to the Sopranos. The Fitzgibbon crime family have been major players in organised crime for 30 or 40 years, and one of the reasons they've stayed at the top of their game is because they use extreme violence when necessary to protect their interests. They can be very intimidating and are very good at getting to a witness, which is why the police find it very difficult to build cases against them, and they're extremely good drug dealers, so it's a recipe for success in an underworld crime family. Mr. Paul Fitzgibbon was a lesser-known brother of Mr. Jason Fitzgibbon and Mr. Ian Fitzgibbon, who was also part of the criminal syndicate. Jason and Ian were both jailed in 2013 after it emerged they were plotting to flood the UK with Turkish heroin. When Turkish police smashed an Istanbul-based drug gang, the trail began to lead back to South Liverpool. Manchester Crown Court heard that the 60% pure heroin would have cost around €300,000 to buy wholesale from Turkey. The drugs would have made around £7 million when sold on the streets of Liverpool. The Serious Organised Crime Agency then mounted a sophisticated surveillance operation to take down the Fitzgibbons. Jason and Ian were prepared to go to the source countries such as Turkey and understand the complex logistics of smuggling hard drugs across Europe and into the UK. Detectives believe the brothers, who cultivated criminal contacts across Europe and South America, never had any legitimate income. Both would frequently travel abroad for meetings with drug contacts in Colombia, Mexico, Spain and Turkey, and in 2007 were suspected of heading up a heroin smuggling plot from Holland. The Dutch case ultimately collapsed due to a lack of evidence. Here, Mr. Jason Fitzgibbon, you have a big lad from a notorious family who are capable, and so the police say, of more than just a little frightener. In 2006, Mr. Jason Fitzgibbon was involved in a major confrontation with the North Liverpool drug gang in the Mosquito Club in Victoria Street. Jason was said to have been threatened with a weapon, which resulted in a major standoff between two rival factions in a city night spot. There were reports of a near riot as the two groups clashed. Intelligence from the England to Turkish police stopped the deal in its tracks, and on September 26, 2011, 5 local drug traffickers were rounded up, and in the boot of a car officers discovered 114 half-kilo packs of heroin wrapped in brown tape. The aftermath of the failed drug deal in Turkey was recorded in part of a covert listening device. They were caught as part of Operation Bistro, an investigation into drug dealing and associated money laundering, which police say was taking place on an enormous scale between at least 2008 and 2011. They imported 57 kilograms of heroin into Britain via Turkey, as well as a plot involving 165,000 ecstasy tablets and a batch of pure MDMA powder. The heroin had a street value of almost £7 million, and the ecstasy tablets were worth between £494,000 and £823,000. Jason Fitzgibbon and Ian Fitzgibbon were the leaders of the criminal enterprise, both deeply immersed in drug dealing and money laundering. They ran a lucrative international business, cultivating criminal contacts in the Netherlands, Spain, Turkey, but also in South America, including Colombia and Mexico. They had developed numerous tactics of throwing detectives off their scent. They would conduct business meetings while jogging, and when travelling, would fail to turn up for pre-booked flights, taking different routes and paying in cash. They had also developed a criminal shorthand designed to be indecipherable to all but their fellow conspirators. Little fellas were ecstasy tablets. A ticket man was a courier. A quid was £1,000. They used false passports to travel, booked flights they never actually caught, and paid for with clone cards. Trips to Turkey were via circuitous routes. Miss Christine and her husband Billy were ripping off the estate £1,500 a month in benefits. With pension credits, disability allowance, the family also enjoyed holidays in their luxurious villa in Spain, bought for €300,000, and they kitted out the interior of their Mossley Hill home in Liverpool with top-notch furnishings. But they refrained from lavish trips abroad, and when Mr. Jason Fitzgibbon parked a Porsche on the driveway of his mother's home, he was quickly warned that he was bringing in unwanted attention. The family kept bundles of cash in numerous carrier bags under the house floorboards with a mix of English, Irish and Scottish banknotes, indicating how far their tentacles had stretched. The drug dealing involved huge quantities of both heroin and ecstasy. It involved the importation of multi-kilogram quantities of the drugs into this country, and then the onward supply of those drugs. The scope of the enterprise was truly breathtaking. Those involved had established a criminal network not only in the United Kingdom but in foreign countries, from where they were obtaining massive quantities of heroin. A bug or a covert listening device was planted in their mum's South Liverpool home, which recorded the brothers talking about crime and drugs. The bug, which was planted by an SOCA agent in the family home on Edale Road, recorded the brothers bickering in front of their mum about who was the better drug dealer. Detectives were astounded when they listened back to the tape of Jason and Ian rowing over who was the more adept criminal. Jason said, "Whatever he can do, I can do 10 times better." And Ian replied, "But who do you know over there, lad? Who do you know? Who brought everything back? When has yours brought anything back? When?" The same device also recorded the brothers singing a pop song called "It's All About the Money." Ian Fitzgibbon was later recorded remarking, "That's the story of Jason's life, that turkey thing. 300 quid. 300 quid they owe us." When the police searched her house in Allerton, South Liverpool, they discovered she was far from hard up. Carrier bags containing £182,000 in cash were found hidden under the floorboards and in the central columns of the dining room table. At Mr. Ian Fitzgibbon's home nearby in St Helens, a further £35,000 was found. A member of the notorious Liverpool crime family, Paul Fitzgibbon was banned from driving after failing to reveal who was driving his car in a high-speed police pursuit. Officers lost sight of Paul's hired Audi after trying to stop it in Liverpool last spring. He was disqualified for not identifying the driver of the car in the chase, or in a second incident involving the same car in Staffordshire. Paul said he was hiring the smart Audi Quattro for £15 a day when it was involved in the chase after officers spotted it on Garston Old Road. Michael Caine, prosecuting, said, "This is a matter where the police have seen the vehicle, decided to make the decision to stop the vehicle, and a high-speed pursuit followed." The high-speed pursuit took the cars from Garston Old Road to Duncan Road South, before police lost sight of it. Prosecution papers were sent to Mr. Paul seeking the identity of the driver, as well as in a second incident involving the Audi in Staffordshire in April. His solicitor Lionel Greig referred to problems with Paul's mum and dad's benefits around that time due to consequences of issues relating to the home address from other agencies. Paul argued that losing his licence would severely undermine his role as a full-time carer for his dad, who suffered from arthritis. But District Judge Michael Abelson still banned him from driving for a year and ordered him to pay £1,440 in fines and costs. The 57-month sentence imposed on William Fitzgibbon from Liverpool for supplying drugs is believed to be one of the highest handed down locally by Sheriff Graham Napier, and follows the tougher action taken recently on drug suppliers targeting the Isles. Mr. William Fitzgibbon, a prisoner in Aberdeen, appeared from custody at Lerwick Sheriff Court on Wednesday, where he was described as a career criminal. He had previously pleaded guilty to being concerned in the supply of Class A drugs on the 25th of May at Loch of Vaster Got and elsewhere. Mr. William had also admitted trying to hide from police in the undergrowth at Cloomal Junction, Boddam, Donorosnis, intending to pervert the course of justice on the same date. Prosecutor Fiscal Duncan Mackenzie said 2 police officers on a vehicle patrol had seen the 2 accused sitting in a stationary Vauxhall Corsa on a single-track road at the Loch of Vaster. When police stopped to ask if they were right, they replied yes and immediately accelerated away. The police followed, and by 5 PM they reached Boddam, where they later found Mr. William hiding. They found £450 on him and a wrap of heroin in a section of a sock in the footwell of the car. The police were convinced drugs had been thrown from the car during the pursuit, and later found 75 wraps of heroin at Tingwall in the toe section of the sock, found by analysis to be part of the same sock as in the car. Police then searched the guest house where Mr. William Fitzgibbon had been staying under a false name, and found £2,300 in notes. The court heard that 76 £20 deals would be worth £1,520, representing a 400% profit on the cost price. Shetland was being specifically targeted because of the high price of drugs. Prior to the offence, William had been living in Ripton Street, Walton, Liverpool. He had had a checkered employment history, but his offending had significantly reduced in recent years. His partner had incurred drug debts, and he was drawn into a drug syndicate because of threats made to his 3 children. He had no connection with Shetland, but was sent here to collect £3,000. When he had done that, he could return and his debt would be cleared. Sheriff Napier said that William had admitted being one of the team targeting Shetland as the money man, the enforcer. He had been involved in violence and dishonesty in the past. The sheriff said he could expect to be dealt with severely and sentenced him to 6 years in custody, reduced to 57 months backdated to the 26th of May because of his early plea of guilty. The drugs and the money were ordered to be forfeit. Miss Christine, who admitted laundering £180,000 drugs cash found hidden beneath floorboards in the Mossley home, was jailed for 2 years. Mr. Ian Fitzgibbon was admitted conspiracy to supply heroin, MDMA and money laundering, and was sentenced to 14 years and 6 months in prison. Jason Fitzgibbon pleaded guilty to conspiring to import heroin and was imprisoned for 16 years. Mr. Daniel Smith admitted conspiracy to supply MDMA and was jailed for 10 years. Prosecutors agreed to let charges against William Fitzgibbon lay on file due to a supposed health issue. Sentencing Miss Christine, who admitted money laundering at an earlier hearing, Judge Michael Henshaw said, "You are a significant figure in this case. You knew precisely what you were involved in, you knew precisely where the money was coming from, and I am quite sure you enjoyed the lifestyle that came with it." He conceded that she must have been influenced by her sons, but said that she was capable of making her voice felt in the house. Jason, who like his brother is a father of 3, was previously given a 7-year prison sentence for serious assault years back, including violent rows with Mr. Curtis Warren, a local gangster, once on Interpol's most wanted list. Ian and Jason Fitzgibbon were locked up in 2013. The National Crime Agency believes that the siblings may have benefited from criminal activities to the tune of £3.2 million. They are using the proceeds of crime legislation in a bid to recoup as much of their ill-gotten gains as possible, but suspect assets could be held off the balance sheets. Model and Desperate Housewives reality TV star Miss Amanda Harrington appeared in court once to support her friend Ian Fitzgibbon. The actress attended Manchester Crown Court along with members of the Fitzgibbon family. Miss Harrington, who is perhaps best known for appearing in the Channel 4 reality TV series Desperate Housewives, only returned from holiday in Miami the day before the day of the hearing. The glamour model sat in court alongside her mum as authorities bid to seize the criminal fortunes of Ian and Jason. Miss Harrington, who was given a kiss on the cheek by Mr. Ian Fitzgibbon as he was led back to the cells, did not give any evidence in the case. Miss Christine Fitzgibbon, the brother's mother, was told to pay back more than £120,000 in ill-gotten gains, or face more than 2.5 years in prison. She was said to have made £280,000 by laundering the illicit profit of her sons. A Rolex watch, cash in a bank account and £1,000 cash will go towards footing the bill, as will the sale of the family home in Mossley Hill, in which she has equity. It was at that house that the police probing the drugs plot had discovered carrier bags containing £182,000 in cash hidden under the floorboards and in the central column of a dining room table. That cash has already been confiscated. The Fitzgibbons, whose violent exploits and feuds with rival families stretch back decades on Merseyside, were described as Tier 1 criminals and at the top of their game. Before an 18-month undercover operation led to their arrest, the Fitzgibbon brothers dispute the amount of money they are said to have made and claim that they have few assets available to seize. Brothers Jason and Ian Fitzgibbon, who have now been released from prison, face a raft of restrictions on their financial activity. The restrictions, aimed exclusively at those who have been involved in serious organised crime, impose a range of strict lifestyle restrictions. The restrictions take effect when individuals are released from prison. The restrictions are designed to prevent hardcore criminals from returning to their old businesses after they have left jail and include Serious Crime Prevention Orders, or SCPOs, and Financial Reporting Orders, FROs, and Travel Reporting Orders, TRO. Mr. Danny Smith, a one-time associate of the Fitzgibbons, is also on the NCA list. Mr. Smith, who is very well known within the city's underworld, now faces an array of restrictions on his financial activity, access to property and vehicles, and the South Liverpool man is subject to a SCPO, TRO and FRO. The brothers' banker, or mum, Christine Fitzgibbon, also faces being stripped of cash accrued illegally, a suspected £447,000. The crime gang's trusted lieutenant, Mr. Daniel Smith, is suspected to have made £148,000 through illegal activities and also faces losing that cash. But really, the issue is going to be hidden in assets. In the case of Miss Christine Fitzgibbon, we have had the very briefest of discussions, but it is possible that we may be able to dispose of the matter without a hearing. In the case of Mr. Daniel Smith, his position is a bit different. There are issues regarding the ownership of the drugs, and also regarding his alleged legitimate income, Again, there is an issue of hidden assets. Let us know what you think of the Fitzgibbon family and their sentences that Ian and Jason were given, and if you think they were fair or unreasonable. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe. Hello everyone, welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content. Today we take a look at one of the most dangerous criminal families to ever exist in the UK criminal underworld, especially in the Everton area. A family that became so notorious that police were forced to create a specialist team in order to try and take back control of the streets in which the gang had taken over. The G family were a very notorious crime family that grew up on the dangerous Grizedale estate, which can be found in Everton. Darren and Daniel G were very well known on the estate and part of the larger family, which included their other siblings Billy, Ian and Stephen G. In particular, out of all the brothers, Daniel and Darren G had both become involved in very serious crime at an early age. The brothers made it clear that they wanted to make their mark in the Grizedale estate. In many previous interviews, Darren has explained how the brothers had nothing but a poor experience in the education system, and because of this bad experience, he had been left with no choice but to leave school at the age of 13. By the time the brothers were young adults, Darren explained that most of the G family did not have the necessary qualifications or skills that were required to get a decent job, especially one that would support them on the estate. Just a few miles to the north of the city centre, Everton's Grizedale estate had been turned into an extremely dangerous drugs market by the brothers in a quest to make money and gain control. The brothers and their extensive criminal activities left the police with no choice but to task an independent team with the job of taking down the G organisation. Ordinary families who wanted no part in crime had no choice but to look the other way as crimes were committed on a daily basis. And once the G family realised that the local residents had lost all faith in police, it only got worse. The brothers now terrorised anyone who stood in their way, on their conquest to turn the residential estate of Grizedale into an area that was exempt from the rule of law. The Grizedale estate was home and stomping grounds for the G brothers. The crime family enjoyed their status as gang leaders, and it's mostly agreed that the crime gang that polluted Grizedale was led by Darren and Daniel G, who both had no trouble using extreme violence and intimidation tactics to dominate the back streets and alleyways in the North Liverpool estate. The brothers were always associated with very serious violence and had also made a lot of money drug dealing. The leading members of the G family understood the game and became employers as well as enforcers to people who resided on the estate. The G brothers had surrounded themselves with many people that they had grown up with and knew they could trust. The brothers and their criminal gang had reportedly used the profits that they had made from selling drugs in the local community to buy more loyalty, protection and better security. It was also reported that the G brothers paid children to be on the street corner rather than go to school. These young foot soldiers were paid large sums of money to give more incentive to be willing to participate in the criminal activities of the gang. The brothers created an extensive criminal network in and around Grizedale estate, one that became so big that many reported it was a common sight to see mums and dads selling drugs around the clock. The worst thing about this was mums and dads would have the kids with them as they tried to sell as much crack and heroin as they possibly could. At the brothers' height in the drugs game, it was reported that the Gs were earning at a very minimum around £20,000 a week from their extensive criminal activities in and around Everton. The police and the local residents all knew that the brothers were running a 24-hour Class A drugs business, and one that was based in the heart of the Grizedale estate. The brothers and their gang would go on to operate around-the-clock drug sales with pay-as-you-go mobile phones being used to take orders, then dispatching outriders on mountain bikes to deliver the product to the customer. Younger kids, who were not yet ready in the eyes of the gang for handling the drugs and large amounts of cash, would instead be offered a chance to be employed for £50 a week to act as lookouts to spot police and rival gang members. It must have been unimaginably difficult for locals who just wanted to live a law-abiding lifestyle and did not want any involvement in the G's criminal enterprises. They, in essence, all had become outsiders on their own estate, and the locals were forced to confront the many inherent risks and dangers of living next to some of the country's most dangerous criminals. A survey conducted on behalf of the police had shown that the fear of violence being committed stood at 80% among the law-abiding community on the Grizedale estate. As well as their ability to inflict extreme violence without hesitation, it has also been suggested that the G family had also been able to flourish in such a way because of a peculiar situation that allowed them to thrive in the Grizedale estate. Many people describe the Grizedale estate as a place that's removed from the rest of the world. Many presumed that there was another much more organised and higher powered criminal organisation behind the G crime family. This theory was especially believed by the police and detectives who were working in the G case. To them it seemed the brothers appeared to be the public front of what was a very violent and extremely sadistic regime. It was clear that the Gs appeared to relish that notoriety that the criminal exploits had earned them, amongst the local community especially, and they liked to be in the thick of the action whenever it occurred. Tit-for-tat shootings became commonplace around the estate, and it was made very clear that nobody was allowed to stand in the way of the brothers' profitable money-making rackets. In 2003, there were simmering tensions between the G brothers and a rival faction of drug dealers who were also in operation in the area. But by 2004, the fallout had resulted in a wave of shootouts across the north of Liverpool. On the first day of January 2004, there was a double shooting in the Royal Oak pub in West Derby. One man died from the shooting and another was left fighting for his life. Relations between another local drug boss named William Moore and the G's criminal family had deteriorated at a rapid rate. On the evening of the 6th of April 2004, the G's returned to the Grizedale estate after attending a funeral in Speke. The brothers and the two friends were driving along Robson Street when Darren's younger brother spotted a suspicious car on the street. They stopped the car and reversed to see who was inside. However, upon doing so, they were met by former SAS officer Darren Waterhouse. Mr. Waterhouse was a hitman, and he was hired by the opposing crime boss to take out the rival gang or any of its members. Upon seeing his intended target, Mr. Waterhouse began shooting. He riddled the Ford Galaxy with bullets. However, the intended target, Darren, had just switched seats with his friend Craig Barker, who was only 18 at the time. And to make matters worse, the group was driving a new car they had just brought recently. As this car was a different model to the Galaxy they were used to driving, the group was still getting used to using the new clutch. And as the shooting began, in a rush to escape the shootout, the car was stalled and unfortunately Mr. Barker was left in point-blank range of the gunfire. He was consequently hit with many bullets from the hitman. After the shooting had taken place and upon realising that he had shot the wrong target, Mr. Waterhouse made his exit. Darren tried to take Mr. Barker to hospital in the car that had just been shot up, but a bullet had been lodged into the gearbox of the car, and because of this, the car was now stuck in second gear. Unable to drive the car above second gear, Darren pulled the car over and stopped another car passing by. The woman who was driving the car pulled over but was met by Darren covered in blood screaming at her to open the car door. She was so scared that she refused to let him in. Darren had no choice but to smash the car window and steal the car so that he could rush his friend to the hospital. But unfortunately, Mr. Barker died of his injuries. Ian G, who was driving the vehicle at the time, suffered life-changing injuries. Mark Richardson, another associate of the G's, suffered a minor wound and managed to escape. Darren G, according to intelligence, was thought to have been Mr. Waterhouse's intended target for the shooting, but after unknowingly changing seats with his friend, was very luckily not hurt. Darren recounts that the whole incident is something that will never leave his thoughts, as his best friend Mr. Barker was fatally shot in a case of mistaken identity right in front of him. He even recounted that the bullets were clearly meant for him, as they immediately stopped shooting once they realised they had hit the wrong person. The gunman, Mr. Waterhouse, used to serve with the Coldstream Guards, and was honoured for his highly commendable actions by way of a military cross, and also presented with the Radar People of the Year award. Darren Waterhouse was convicted in 2005 for the murder of Craig Barker and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Darren has always professed his innocence to the crime and still does to this day. The courts found Mr. Waterhouse guilty of being involved in the shooting of Craig Barker. Mr. Waterhouse had admitted he had associates from that area, associates that he had met whilst in prison previously while serving time on a drugs charge. For one reason and another, Mr. Waterhouse became involved in the drug culture, having left the army. While serving his prison sentence, he met his co-defendant, William Moore. Mr. Waterhouse and Mr. Moore became very good friends, and had even associated outside of the prison environment. William had a brother called John, who had explained to Mr. Waterhouse that there appeared to be some discontent with a notorious family that was competing for control of the drugs market, the G's in Liverpool. On the night Mr. Barker was killed, Mr. Waterhouse had agreed to attend Liverpool to see William. He travelled up in his own car, using his own mobile phone to keep in contact with William and taking his dog with him. The prosecution alleges that Mr. Waterhouse attended Liverpool as a contract killer, and that Darren G was the intended victim, not Craig. The shooting occurred on Robson Street on the Grizedale estate in Everton on April 6, 2004. Craig was in a car with 3 of his friends, Darren G, Ian G and Mark Richardson. The driver of the car was usually Darren G, the one whom Mr. Moores was having trouble with. Darren G has just got in the back of the car as he was playing with a new computer game that he had just installed, so Craig was now the driver. The group were driving around the Everton area when a man jumped out of a car and opened fire on the Galaxy they were sitting in. Shots were fired all over the car in what was described as an uncontrolled manner. Craig was shot several times as he scrambled around in the car in an attempt to escape. 2 passengers received no injuries, and one, Ian G, received injuries to his leg and thigh. The gunman left the scene in his car, which was later discovered burnt out. The police attended the scene and all parties refused to cooperate with the police. Later that evening, Craig died from his injuries. Later on, further statements were obtained from the other occupants of the car. Darren G had described the gunman as having red or ginger hair and looking like a male wearing an alpine hat. Mr. Waterhouse was arrested in Luton at his home address. Whilst at the police station, Mr. Waterhouse was asked to cooperate in an identification parade, to which he consented. The identification suite was new at Luton police station, and Mr. Waterhouse had been arrested with no clothing on his upper body. It was a hot summer's day at the time, and the police ID suite at the time did not have any clothing to offer Mr. Waterhouse to wear, but the officer investigating the crime had a spare t-shirt that he had brought to work with him that day. The t-shirt was taken to and worn by Mr. Waterhouse on the ID parade. It was a video parade. The t-shirt was navy coloured, and the other volunteers in the parade were specifically selected around this, as well as a few with navy coloured t-shirts to blend in with the t-shirt Mr. Waterhouse had been given to wear. By the time the video had made its way up to Liverpool, the volunteers had been changed by the inspector as he found them not to be suitable, and the volunteers who were wearing a navy t-shirt had now been removed. The video was thereafter shown to 3 occupants of the car, who had now changed their minds and decided to cooperate with the police about the shooting. Ian picked out Mr. Waterhouse from the video parade, albeit in his statement he said, "I didn't see him fire or what was firing because I ducked down straight away, and I can only recall both were white males, and that's it really. I don't recall any clothing, ages or sizes, it all happened too fast and my head was down in my lap area." The others did not make an identification. An anonymous witness who stood approximately 12 feet from the junction phoned the police and gave a description of the gunman as wearing a balaclava hat cricket style and coveralls and gloves on. Mr. Waterhouse was charged with the murder, along with William and John Moore. During the trial, it emerged that Craig's mother had given the police a list of several names that she believed were responsible for killing her son, and all the names on this list have since been shot and killed. There was also another male who was ginger-haired from the area, and someone who had a fractured relationship with the G's. This same male had secured his alibi, as he was in an off-licence around the time of the shooting, where his girlfriend worked, and he secured the CCTV footage from the shop and lodged it with his solicitors before he had even been arrested or questioned. Mr. Waterhouse suggested to the court that that is slightly strange behaviour for someone who has nothing to do with the crime. Mr. Waterhouse accepted that he was in Liverpool that night, but on the basis that he was not there to shoot or kill anyone. During his trial, an ex-soldier who served with Mr. Waterhouse attended the trial to give character references. The ex-soldier was now a serving police officer and stated to the court that Mr. Waterhouse was an expert in using firearms. In his personal opinion, an uncontrolled shooting of this nature was not in Mr. Waterhouse's style, or in fact, for that matter, how the pair had been trained to shoot by the special forces. All military personnel had been taught to execute a double tap when shooting to kill in the army. A double tap is when 2 shots are fired to the chest and 2 shots are fired to the head, and the ex-soldier wanted to make clear that the court, in a way without sounding like boasting too much, that Mr. Waterhouse was way too much of a professional and had too much expertise to shoot in such a haphazard way. However, regardless of this statement, Darren Waterhouse and William Moore were both convicted by the jury and sentenced to serve 30 years in prison each. The CPS proceeded to have another trial with William's brother John Moore, who then decided to change his plea to guilty on the basis that he knew harm was going to be caused to an individual, but not harm which would result in death. Some years after the conviction, Mr. Waterhouse claims Darren G sent him a Christmas card, and inside the card was allegedly a note from Darren stating that his brother had been able to pick Mr. Waterhouse out on the ID parade as the police had told him what t-shirt Mr. Waterhouse was wearing in the picture. A statement was taken from Darren G by the solicitor representing Mr. Waterhouse regarding this incident. Mr. Waterhouse also claims that during the disclosure of the trial, the CPS refused to disclose the 999 call that was made during the shooting. The judge said it did not assist the defence or undermine the prosecution case enough to be used in court. It was alleged that Mark Richardson had phoned 999 when the car was under attack, and within this recording there are specific questions that the operator asks, especially in particular to descriptions of suspects that are attacking. Based on this new evidence, an application was made to the Court of Appeal, the COA, on behalf of Mr. Waterhouse, who considered that this new evidence from Darren G should be enough evidence to warrant a retrial. However, the Court of Appeal dismissed the application, stating that Darren G was not a credible witness and could not be believed. An argument was presented by John Cooper, QC, acting on behalf of Mr. Waterhouse, that the 999 call that was made during the attack was highly relevant in light of this new indication for an appeal. The Courts of Appeal refused to see any reference under the new evidence and did not agree the 999 calls that were made under extreme duress should be disclosed. Darren Waterhouse argues that if the 999 call does not undermine the prosecution or assist the defence, then why is it that this recording has not been disclosed? The solicitors who work for Mr. Waterhouse stated that in most cases the 999 transcripts are served, especially during such a high profile trial. Darren Waterhouse is adamant the 999 tape recording will prove his innocence. Mr. Waterhouse believes this is a complete miscarriage of justice. His defence is that he is a highly trained soldier who, according to the prosecution's case, could not carry out a contract killing on the right victim, used his own car and phone, and had to spray a car with 9 bullets from 3 feet away. The very same man was awarded the Military Cross for bravery and leadership and served 14 years, most of which he was an instructor in weapons tactics. He also served on covert ops for the SAS. The prosecution suggested that Mr. Waterhouse received money for the killing, but stated there was no evidence that funds had ever come from William Moore. Mr. Waterhouse explained that he did have money around him at the time, but that was from cultivating cannabis. The police said that the crop he was currently growing when arrested had not come to its fruition, and served an account statement from the electricity company which showed money had been put on the electricity meter from November 17, 2003 to January 22, 2004 in the sum of £210. After the court case, his defence team managed to obtain a full electricity statement which showed that £1,650 worth of electricity had been used from July 2004 and a full crop of cannabis had been grown by this stage, contrary to what the police/prosecution suggested. However, regardless of Darren Waterhouse's complaints, he remains in jail to this day for the contract murder of Craig Barker. In 2005, William Moore, who was 45 at the time, and Darren Waterhouse, who was 39 at the time, were both jailed for life for the Craig Barker murder after a trial at Liverpool Crown Court. The 2004 summer shooting was the explosive climax of a North Liverpool drugs war that rocked the area. David Regan, who was 36 at the time, was blasted 3 times in the back and legs at the car wash that he owned on Prescott Road, Old Swan on May 18, 2004. Mr. Regan was thought to have been shot after he was wrongly blamed for the murder of Craig Barker, and also what Darren G believed was in fact an attempt on his own life, one that had gone wrong during a North Liverpool drug war. Darren said he plotted the murder after being wrongly told that Mr. Regan was behind the attack on him. Darren also explains that when he was given this information about Mr. Regan, he was not in the right frame of mind and that those around him did not pull him to the side and tell him to think about what he was doing, but instead encouraged him to take revenge. Darren G was arrested for the crime and admitted to his part in the murder and was placed on remand to await sentencing. Darren was originally facing a recommended minimum of 35 years under the current sentencing guidelines, as his legal team seen his crime as borderline contract killing. Whilst on remand and awaiting sentence, Darren had accepted in his mind that a sentence of 30 to 35 years was on the horizon, and he had prepared himself mentally to spend the rest of his life in jail. However, on the day of sentencing, something that nobody was expecting happened. When Darren appeared before the court for sentencing, the judge told him that as his crimes were committed pre-2004, Mr. G would now be sentenced under the old law. And because of this, it now gave the judge two choices. A discretionary life sentence if the judge felt Darren would continue to be violent or had a history of violence which was increasing. A sentence where he would not be released until parole approved him being released. Or a fixed long-term determinate sentence. This could be imposed if the judge felt Darren could in fact change if given a second chance to start his life, where he would be given a release date. The judge looked at Darren's criminal record, and upon seeing there was only one previous charge of violence, this was for threatening to blow up a prison officer's car, but as this threat was never actually carried out, the judge ultimately decided to give Darren another chance, and so Darren G was sentenced to 18 years in prison after being found guilty of conspiracy to murder at Manchester Crown Court in 2006. During Darren G's years in prison, he has described how he has seen and was many times part of more criminal activities, and has even told the story of how he was caught having a sexual relationship with a nurse whilst incarcerated. Darren G claims a nurse who was working at the prison, Jane Jackson, was caught topless in a private treating room with himself at HMP Woodhill in Milton Keynes. The Category A prison, which was dubbed Britain's Alcatraz, houses some of the country's most dangerous criminals, including rapists, murderers and terrorists. Miss Jackson had jammed a mop under the door of the treatment room and stripped off in front of the inmate Mr. G. The Nursing and Midwifery Council panel had ruled that a nurse had in fact had an inappropriate and highly sexually motivated relationship with a prisoner whilst at work. Miss Jackson's fitness to practice was found to be impaired because of the misconduct she had taken part in, and she was struck off because of the incident. Paul Morris, who was chairing the hearing, said, "It was quite clear that Miss Jackson had not provided a high standard of practice at all times whilst working, and had acted without any integrity or had respect to uphold the reputation of the profession, especially of those who work with vulnerable people." The hearing found that Miss Jackson had failed to establish and maintain professional boundaries with the prisoner that she was meant to be providing care for, and also found that Miss Jackson was in breach of her obligations as a nurse, which when mounted together amounted to Miss Jackson taking part in very serious professional misconduct. Her flagrant disregard of policy seriously undermines the risk of security, and not only to herself and colleagues who she works with, but the security of the entire prison and its population. Her misconduct carried an unwarranted amount of risk of harm, and brought the whole medical profession, especially those who work within the prison system, into major disrepute. It was reported that Miss Jackson was caught out on February 7, 2009, when a prison guard, Rebecca Langley, had burst into the treatment room during her fling with Mr. G. Her top half was naked as she was holding her bra and staff tunic in her hand, said Barry Dooley for the NMC. A sobbing Miss Jackson was taken straight to the prison governor's office and suspended for her actions before being marched off the premises. Miss Jackson admitted to breaking strict regulations by being alone with a prisoner, and also further breaking the regulations by taking off her clothes. But Miss Jackson had claimed it was a one-off, and she said that she had been pressured into the act by the inmate, and only committed the misconduct as she was fearing for her life. Miss Jackson told how Mr. G had said, "Let me into the treatment room," and he's had this horrible look on his face. She said, "I just froze and panicked and then very stupidly opened the door." She added during the hearing that she opened the door like a robot, adding that the prisoner had the remote control of my body. "At least that's how I felt." HMP Woodhill is one of the country's maximum security prisons, housing inmates that have committed some of the most serious crimes. But Mr. Dooley, who was in charge of overseeing the hearing, stated, "If Miss Jackson was so scared and feared for her life in the way she described, then why would she open a locked door and go in with a prisoner simply based on just a scary look? She did not call out for help at any stage, although she knew that there were prison officers nearby. She even admitted to another member of staff she had put the mop across the door for extra privacy." Miss Jackson had previously said to another officer that she had strong feelings for the prisoner. "I knew deep down that I was a professional and he was a prisoner." It was also suggested that Miss Jackson just threw her keys to the prison doors on a chair during her time with the prisoner, putting the entire security of the jail at risk, the hearing was told. Being in a confined space with a prisoner means that you have potentially put at risk the entire establishment, said Hannah Pugliese, a senior manager with Milton Keynes Primary Care Trust, which provides medical care at the jail. "You could have been held hostage, you could be at very serious risk, especially in that particular environment," she says. Miss Jackson had already confessed to breaching strict security by smuggling a Lynx deodorant and Radox shower gel into the jail for the prisoner in January 2009. "Very stupidly I brought toiletries in just to shut him up," Miss Jackson said. "I knew it was absolutely wrong, but I still did it." The contraband items were found in his cell following Miss Jackson's suspension, adding weight to the NMC's case that Miss Jackson had not just had a momentary fling with a random prisoner, but that it was in fact much more serious and a sexual relationship with one particular prisoner. Mr. G worked in the prison laundry along the corridor from Miss Jackson's office, and would regularly chat to the nurse on his way back to the cells. Miss Jackson also denied that the 2 drug cabinets that were located in her treatment room were left open during her encounter with the prisoner, a claim that was later rejected by the panel. Miss Jackson was fired by the Health Trust on July 9, 2009, following a lengthy and in-depth internal investigation. After serving his time, and now in his 40s, Darren G was released from prison. Darren had mentioned in interviews and to the newspapers that he organised Mr. Reagan's murder because he wrongly believed that he was involved in the murder of his best friend, Craig Barker. Darren said that he felt guilty over the deaths of Mr. Reagan and Craig Barker. He said that his friend Craig was not involved in any serious crimes and that he died that day because of his casual association with the Gs. Darren also explains that he has tried to reach out to the families of those who have been affected with his actions, but it seems unsurprisingly that not everyone is ready to forgive and forget everything that has happened. Nikki Reagan, who spoke on behalf of the Reagan family, had this to say: "The murder of David Reagan in 2004 destroyed our family. We were left isolated and vulnerable. So-called friends disappeared, but that's what happens when a loved one is shot dead." There was a long and complicated court process which led up to the conviction of Darren G. We were subject to threats and intimidation throughout the trial. The Reagan family has struggled to forgive Darren G for the role that he played in organising David's cold-blooded murder. But we do not want or seek revenge. We are painfully aware that nothing good can ever come from acts of revenge or violence. It only ruins more lives. Our message is that the Reagan family wishes to be left alone, and especially left alone by Darren G. He will know what we mean by that. He is active on social media and often posts content which we object to. He appears to hold a grudge of sorts against our family, and we objected to seeing him boasting about chopping heads off on television and on the internet. Surely this was not necessary. After Darren G left prison, he was released into a different world, and has explained how at times he felt so depressed and angry that he himself would have very bad thoughts of taking his own life. But one time whilst having these bad thoughts, he saw a campaign for "Choose a life and not a knife," and said the message hit him hard. It was at this point Darren decided to focus all his energy into something completely different. He decided that he would devote his time to help others not make the same mistake in life that he had made. From that point on, Darren became a prolific anti-knife campaigner, and has spoken of his regret he has felt, especially over the years of his life that he wasted on gangland violence. Darren joined the knife crime charity, the Ben Kinsella Trust, which educates young people on the dangers of knife crime and helps them to make positive choices in life to stay safe. The trust also campaigns for the action and justice of those who are already affected by knife crime, and their campaigns have won numerous awards in recognition of their success. The Ben Kinsella Trust is a trust which campaigns for change, challenging government, businesses and society to ensure everyone takes responsibility for tackling knife crime. However, now becoming a social media sensation and maybe not realising that he was under the watch and scrutiny of millions of people who were touched by his experience, Darren G was removed from the charity after threatening to destroy a podcast host in an online bust-up. The charity had been alerted to inappropriate language used in a public forum and explained that this conduct was contrary to their values and ethics. The charity referenced several articles that were published online, which reported Darren G threatening James English, who hosts the podcast Anything Goes. Darren and Mr. English began to clash in a public disagreement, which saw the pair claiming each other had been used by the other to gain publicity online after Darren had appeared on Anything Goes 3 times for interviews. It had also been reported that Mr. G was uncomfortable with the later appearance of Marvin Herbert on the podcast. Mr. G has also reportedly said himself that he declined to appear on Anything Goes alongside a prison guard. At the time of the bust-up, Mr. G had posted a series of posts on Instagram saying "he's a rat," referring to James English. "I classed him as a friend for a very long time. You've tried to stab me in the back and this isn't a game, you effing ball bag." He also posted that he elevated Mr. English's podcast to a whole new level by suggesting that he helped Mr. English secure 100,000 subscribers in a few months. Mr. English responded by removing all 3 podcast episodes he had conducted with the ex-gangster from his platforms, and said he would not be re-uploading them until he received an apology. In 2008, Liverpool Crown Court was told how Jamie Starkey fired at Danny G after claiming his family suffered months of violence and death threats. Danny G, it was said, cruised around the Grizedale estate in a chauffeur-driven £60,000 Range Rover, whilst children he had recruited to work for him delivered drugs on bikes to the local addicts. Lawyers for Mr. Starkey alleged Danny G's gang had thrown bricks at the Starkey's home, rammed his brother's car off the road, and repeatedly threatened his relatives in their day-to-day lives. On one occasion, criminal associates of Danny G and his gang were said to have smashed every window at Mr. Starkey's home, covering his 4-year-old sister in glass and leaving his family in even more fear. Days before the shooting of Danny G took place, it's claimed Danny had kidnapped one of Mr. Starkey's friends and imprisoned him in a derelict house, where a gang had beaten and stoned him for his friendship to Mr. Starkey. On New Year's Eve, Mr. Starkey had been out celebrating in Everton with friends, when he encountered one of Danny G's criminal associates, who threatened to shoot him. The youngster fled the scene to a nearby derelict property on his road. It was here that Mr. Starkey received a Colt revolver that was hidden inside. During a 15-minute confrontation outside a pub at 5 AM the following morning, witnesses heard Danny G threatening Mr. Starkey's family and goading Mr. Starkey to shoot him. At one point, Danny G told Mr. Starkey, "Shoot me now or I'm going to go and kill your mother." Mr. Starkey felt he was left with no other choice as a way to protect his family and fired. One of the bullets went into Danny G's stomach, which pierced his lung and went straight out of his back. He was taken to the hospital but refused treatment. 4 days later, Danny G was arrested for masterminding a city centre drugs conspiracy and was subsequently jailed for 7.5 years for his part in the drugs plot in June 2008. Mr. Starkey was also jailed in October 2008 after he admitted wounding Mr. G with intent and possessing a firearm with intent to endanger life. It emerged following the shooting Danny G had sent a text message to Mr. Starkey offering not to speak to police in exchange for £20,000. But it was also revealed to the courts that Mr. G was plotting revenge on Mr. Starkey within hours of being injured. When a policeman went to speak to Danny G about his injuries, Mr. G said, "I fell over, mate," and then winked at the officer, but added, "Don't worry though, I'll get the little C-word that did this to me." Mr. G then made a call to Mr. Starkey's mobile just hours after returning home from the hospital after being shot. Danny G is alleged to have said, "All be ready, cause one of yours is gonna get killed. We're not going to go in there, you stupid little tools. You haven't got a clue. We're going to go to one of your girls' mas or anything first. You little wankers, they're going to go first." Also adding, "We're going to deal with every one of them until we get all of you." Police, who by that time had bugged his plush flat in an attempt to trap him over his drug deals, had also managed to obtain recorded phone calls which showed Danny G conspiring to buy guns and threatening to kill Mr. Starkey. Police officers and detectives working the case overheard Mr. G plotting revenge against Mr. Starkey and referring to a .45 and a Mac-10 machine gun. In a conversation with his partner, Danny G was overheard saying, "Don't worry, the little fucker is going. The only place he is safe is in jail, and he won't be safe there. It'll be even worse in there. Then when he is out, I'll slit his fucking throat." The next day he is alleged to have said on the phone, "Pit me in for 12 guns, I'll buy the lot of them." And in another conversation the court heard, "We're going lad, we're going big time, right through the front door, right through the back door, and bring this family down. Kids, whatever, it's all fine lad, see you soon lad." In 2010, Danny G was found guilty of 2 counts of threats to kill and another of 2 of blackmail, and he was told to serve a minimum of 4.5 years, which was to run concurrently with the term that he was already serving for drug dealing. Danny G's barrister, Stuart Lawson Rogers QC, told Liverpool Crown Court that his client had only conspired to arm himself because he feared another confrontation with the Starkey family. QC Rogers claimed that Mr. G had been targeted by the police because of his underworld family name, and revealed to the court that his client's greatest fear was receiving an indefinite sentence, an IPP, because Mr. G believed he would never be released from prison again. Judge Henry Globe QC told the courts, "I am in absolutely no doubt that the public must be protected from you, now and in the future." He also said, "In my opinion, I really do not know when it will be safe to release you to the public again." He ordered the very well built and extremely intimidating Danny G to serve a minimum of 4 years behind bars before his case can go before the parole board. But he also said the sentence will run at the same time as the 7.5 year sentence he is currently serving for drug offences. Mr. G's partner, Kelly Wallace, had wept in the public gallery as Mr. G was led down. Danny G was found guilty of 2 counts of threats to kill, and another 2 of blackmail at a trial. But jurors were unable to agree on the 2 more serious charges of conspiracy to murder and the conspiracy to possess a firearm and ammunition. Jamie Starkey was only 16 when he shot and wounded Daniel G at a point-blank range during a 5 AM New Year's Day standoff outside a pub. He served 3.5 years out of a 7-term sentence before being released in September 2011. Shortly after being released from prison and telling officers that he feared for his life, upon release from prison at around 8 PM on Sunday night, Mr. Starkey was walking to his car outside his home in Fazakerley in Liverpool when a hitman dressed in dark clothing approached Mr. Starkey and cut him down in a hail of bullets. The hitman ran off across the playing field, leaving Mr. Starkey to die. Merseyside police went to interview Danny G in jail, where he's serving an intermediate prison term, or IPP, for threatening to kill Mr. Starkey in a revenge attack. Chief Superintendent John Ward of Merseyside Police said this was a cold-blooded, calculated shooting of a 21-year-old man who had recently been released from prison after shooting another male on New Year's Day 2008. There is no doubt that this was a targeted shooting, and whoever did this meant to kill Jamie Starkey. We believe that some members of the criminal fraternity will know who did this, and will know what lies behind it, and I would appeal to them to contact us. Jamie Starkey was just 21 years old, and should have been looking forward to his future, but he chose a path which ultimately led to his death. 5 men were arrested in connection to the murder, but to this day the crime is still unsolved. Merseyside Police said it is committed to tackling gun crime and taking offenders off the street, and can reassure residents that they are doing everything in their power to find those responsible for this shooting. Danny G, it has been reported, was known as someone who cannot control his anger, not even half as much as Darren. Many ex-prison officers on YouTube who have worked in prisons that he was locked up in have compared him to Charlie Bronson. Both Charlie and Danny are known for their physical strength, but also being trapped in a system with no sight of being released anytime soon. Many even believe that the prison service created Danny G and have moulded him into the new notorious prisoner to take Bronson's place after his numerous prison stunts and experience in the prison system since a young lad. Many stories that have given to us recently about Danny G are from his brother Darren, or have been recounted by Neil Samworth, who served as a Manchester prison guard for 11 years, and has now left the prison service and decided to tell his story online in podcasts. Mr. Samworth describes Danny G as someone who has little to no respect for the prison guards, who are tasked with the job of looking after him whilst being locked up. Danny was described as standing about 6'2", with having a thick neck and thick wrists, and was known to be extremely powerful. He was categorised as a 1%er in the prison system. This is someone that has brought and can reignite at any time huge problems to the entire prison and its population. Mr. Samworth explained that Danny G was a prisoner who was always in the segregation unit, or place that is otherwise known as a solitary confinement. Recalling one particular incident when Danny G had smashed his cell up, it triggered 10 officers to get all padded up and try to confront him about his behaviour. However, Danny was in a very violent mood and single-handedly beat up each one of them as they entered the room to confront him. Mr. Samworth explains how Danny G pulled helmets off the officers' heads, pushed them down and even dealt many of them vicious blows. Following this incident, Danny G was moved to a special cell, one that was stripped bare with nothing except a wooden bucket that was to be used as a toilet. In April 2014, a hitman gunned down a member of the G family, Ian G, in the middle of a residential street in a drive-by shooting. Ian G was found lying in a pool of blood by a passing paramedic response car. Ian had been shot twice in the leg on a previous occasion when he was in the car during an attempt on his brother Darren's life. However, it's also believed that Ian survived this attack and went on to be a very close associate of Danny and Darren G in their drug business. William G, better known as Billy, was found unresponsive at his parents' home on Maryport Close, Everton, on February 19, 2016. Billy was last seen alive at 1 AM that morning after leaving a pub where he had been drinking with his mum. Billy, who was only 38, had a medical history of epilepsy, drug overdoses and alcohol abuse. It was reported that he had taken cocaine and 6 bottles of Copperberg cider before he died. Stephen G in 2017 reportedly targeted a 77-year-old victim and burgled him. Stephen G was arrested after an incident in Cotsbrook Road, Norris Green on the evening of Friday, July 7, 2017. Mr. G admitted to robbing the elderly man's car keys and car in court. It was revealed by the court that Stephen G's past convictions include violence, assault, public disorder, theft and criminal damage and robbery. In another later incident, Mr. G was handed a 2-year antisocial behaviour order, banning him from entering parts of North Liverpool in July 2009. Just weeks after being given the ASBO order, Mr. G carried out 2 more burglaries, for which he was jailed by a judge for 33 months in February 2010. It was reported that this time Stephen G took advantage of the 2 women while they were distracted working in the shops by stealing their purses. After the second raid, he was chased by police and jumped from a flyover, but was tracked down by the police force's helicopter. Desmond Nunan, defending in court, said Stephen G had been homeless and desperate at the time and suffered from acute dyslexia. Stephen G was released on licence, but then went on to run and was returned to jail in June 2011 after stealing from a car. Darren G has come home from spending 12 years in jail to a completely different world and no family support, but has quickly adapted to the new world and become a social media sensation. After spending such a substantial amount of time locked up in prison conditions and having to endure the experiences that he grew up with, it will inevitably take him a while to readjust fully to society and his freedom. However, regardless of personal opinions about Darren, he has, no matter what has been thrown at him, remained focused on spreading his message of choose a life, not a knife, and Calnack UK. With all the life experience that Darren has gained, be it inside or outside the UK criminal justice system, along with his self-described and very traumatic upbringing, Darren G is now in a position where he is now fortunately equipped with more than enough knowledge and life experience to educate and share wisdom with those who might be headed down a wrong path or thinking of making a bad or wrong life-changing decision. In his journey to change his own mindset, whilst also being in the process of trying to help others change and become more positive to make the right choices in life, we wish him the best of luck. The G family, the crimes they committed, and the reputation that they earned will never be forgotten about in the UK criminal underworld. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe. Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. For more exciting content, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at one of the most dangerous criminal families to ever exist in the UK criminal underworld. A family that held the Manchester criminal underworld with such a tight grip that the effects are still felt to this day. Consisting of 3 brothers, Desmond, the enforcer and hitman, Dominic, the charismatic but predatory entrepreneur, and Damien, who it was said was the level-headed but very powerful leader of the family. The siblings had set out to build their criminal empire through the brutal violence, and this would include stabbings, shootings and even sexual assaults. In this video we will detail the beginnings of the siblings and their early life, and how they grew up to live a life of crime, one that would result in them becoming the rulers of Manchester's criminal underworld. Growing up in the Nunan family was a big one, with 14 children within the family altogether, and each child had a name that began with the letter D. This was a reference to Dublin and the Irish roots of their parents. It's believed that the brothers' ability to commit terrifying and brutal crimes were a product of being brought up in the decaying city of Manchester within the 1970s and 80s. The trio, Damien, Desi and Dominic, started out working as security at the Hacienda nightclub, where they would become known and respected as the top hardmen of the city and began selling drugs to the local partygoers. The Hacienda quickly became known as a cult spot in the city, hosting big names like Madonna to play at the venue, and being such a busy nightclub it was a good place for any criminal gang looking to make a lot of money from drug dealing. This allowed the brothers to sell their own drugs and take cuts from other gangs who were looking to sell inside to pocket up to 50 grand a night, and market themselves as one of Manchester's most established criminal families, a title and privilege they would and did kill to protect. Bob Dunbar, who worked for Greater Manchester Police at the time, said the Nunan brothers were involved with gang culture, drugs and beatings. It became almost a local legend that if you went to a club in Manchester, the brothers in some way would be on or involved in the security at the door. Another former member of the Greater Manchester Police, Martin Harding, claimed the Nunans were synonymous with violence. They displayed very little fear of anyone. They most certainly had no fear of the authorities, and most definitely no fear of going to prison. They were not scared to use violence at any time or any place. Hopefully the brothers had built themselves a brutal reputation, one that would control the streets of Manchester for a very long time. In their spare time, the brothers would also target security vans that were picking up money from local businesses in and around Manchester, where they would disguise themselves with tights pulled over their heads and would proceed to violently push the drivers to the floor before ransacking the van for cash. Journalist Donald McIntyre speculates that the brothers and their associates made an estimated £5 to £6 million from these cash-in-transit robberies. However, a key event in the brothers' criminal organisation was a murder that nearly brought the foundations for their kingdom they had built crumbling down. This was the murder of the flamboyant White Tony Johnson. Mr. Johnson was a leader of the Cheetham Hill gang and drove a white Ford Sierra Cosworth. His shooting was in the car park of the Penny Black pub in February 1991, and it was big news, and after a police investigation, Desmond Nunan went on trial for his murder. But the first trial that was held collapsed amid rumours of jury tampering. However, at the second trial, after all the evidence was heard, Desmond Nunan was acquitted. It had been alleged that Mr. Johnson was killed after a fallout between rival gangs about how £350,000, which was the proceeds from a robbery that had been committed by both, were divided up and split amongst its members. Despite the death of their rival leader bringing an end to any opposing organised crime families in Manchester, the Nunans ultimately benefited as their position was strengthened and they expanded their operations to other cities, despite increased police surveillance of their activities. It is said that the brothers had acquired business interests in nightclubs in Liverpool, London and Newcastle. Desmond Nunan also tried whenever he was free to do deals in other cities with other gangland figures, and was soon becoming involved with several crime bosses, including the Liverpool drugs baron Mr. Curtis Warren, and the head of one of Newcastle's biggest criminal organisations, Mr. Paddy Conroy. And due to the strength and power of the Nunan family, Desmond was able to be a prime peacemaker in the Manchester gang truces, which for a short period of time brought the war in Moss Side to an end. Another event that took place was very important in this story of the gang, and includes an attempt to overtake the doors at the Hacienda nightclub by another rival gang from South Manchester. This attempt was brutally suppressed by the Nunan brothers, and in retaliation Dominic called at the rival gang's local pub and used a machete to decapitate one of their dogs that were outside. He then walked into the pub and placed the head on the pool table, making it clear that anyone who was thinking about it should think twice before having any ideas that they would try and take over anything that belonged to the Nunans. Despite their vicious nature, the brothers had always made sure they played an active role within their community. In Moss Side, they offered help to the local community by setting up their own makeshift police station in a disused building. They did not require payment in most cases, but acted as vigilantes who required nothing more than a cooked breakfast to sort out any bother. There's also footage of Dominic sitting with families and their children, who served them a feast of bacon and eggs as thanks, many oblivious at this point to his vile, predatory character. Each member of the trio was known for their notorious reputation, with the last remaining brother of the trio, Dominic, facing the consequences of his actions to this day. Desmond Nunan was, after the death of Damien, the notorious head of the Nunan criminal firm, was known as Desi to the family and friends. When asked on camera by reporter Donald McIntyre how many murders police suspected he was responsible for, saying he heard it was around 24, Desi Nunan broke into a broad smile before signalling with hand gestures at a real total of 27. He was a lifelong Irish Republican and anti-fascist, shown by his activities he did within the Anti-National Front, squads of the early 1980s, and then with Anti-Fascist Action, which was formed in 1985. His last known anti-fascist work was canvassing the BNP British National Party when they stood in Newton Heath in 2002. He shows a significant danger to Manchester's criminal underworld, being the gangland enforcer for his criminal career and openly admitting to his involvement alongside his brothers in the murder of 22-year-old gangster White Tony Johnson in February 1991. The shooting of White Tony was thought to be part of a battle for control of the hard drugs market in Manchester. And although Desmond was able to walk free from the murder case, he was unable to do so 2 years later when he was one of the group that left twin brothers battered and bleeding outside a nightclub. A witness of the event described the then 36-year-old as acting like a complete psycho. Desmond Nunan, however, pleaded guilty this time and was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in jail for violent disorder and causing grievous bodily harm. And by May 1988 was convicted again of perverting the course of justice and wounding. One charge involved making threats of violence and death towards prosecution witnesses and relatives in an attempt to stop evidence being given at court, where the witnesses were police officers. He lived the last few years of his life as the father of two with an addiction to crack cocaine and booze, despite the best efforts of his brothers and wife Sandra to make him kick the habit. Dominic Nunan was one of the most notorious UK criminal underworld figures of the last 30 years, especially in Manchester, but it was also revealed later that he was also a sex offender. Dominic Nunan worked with his brothers to head their criminal firm and more than 40 convictions for a wide range of offences. These include armed robbery, police assault, possession of firearms, prison escape, and fraud, as well as recent charges of indecent assault and attempted rape. Despite having revelled in a gangster reputation, his notoriety has been enough to influence some young men and manipulate others. This can be seen from the many victims who have come forward to describe some of his heinous actions. His first victim was aged just 10 when Mr. Nunan, who was 6 years older, took him from a care home and indecently assaulted him twice, ordering the boy not to tell anyone. Dominic Nunan also had a second victim who claimed to be 16 or 17 when he first met Mr. Nunan outside a pizzeria. He detailed how Mr. Nunan threatened him, accusing him of having called him gay before he was beaten by a gang of teens with hockey sticks, and then indecently assaulted by Mr. Nunan on a few occasions, once in a disused shop. In his early teens in the 2000s, when he met Mr. Nunan, a third victim stated how he had been molested on 20 or more occasions and described how he would spend time driving around with Mr. Nunan and other young lads and would attend parties where there was drink and drugs. Mr. Nunan would ply them with drink, but not to get drunk himself, and his victim described being brainwashed into thinking the abuse was normal. A fourth victim also said that he was under the spell of Mr. Nunan, aged in his mid-teens when he met him in the 2000s, agreeing to renovate a pub for him. In 2010, a rape charge was dropped, and shortly after Dominic Nunan was released from a long prison sentence on a licence. He was accused of raping a woman in a hotel room after celebrating his birthday, but prosecutors dropped the case. Mr. Nunan was cleared of child rape charges in 2013 after the court heard his accuser, a boy of 15 who claimed to have been molested in a flat in Bloom Street in Manchester city centre, had a history of making false complaints. In 2016, Nunan was found not guilty of engaging in a sex act in front of a minor, although he was convicted of perverting the course of justice by offering £5,000 to the boy's family to get the charge dropped. The prosecution alleged that the boy was made to cover his face with a poster as a vulnerable adult man was intimidated into performing a sex act on Mr. Nunan in a bedroom. Mr. Nunan was also convicted of arson and blackmail connected to a row over an ice cream van and jailed for 11 years. However, despite his predatory nature, he was not your usual crime boss. Although he was certainly a cunning intellectual individual, he has trumpeted that he is an anti-racist and has made much of being able to speak Urdu, although he only knows a few phrases. He is also a homosexual. Over the years, Greater Manchester Police have found little difficulty in obtaining evidence to lock him up for everything from possessing a gun to arson and blackmail, and in fact he has spent most of his adult life behind bars. Even though this has been the case, Dominic Nunan was recalled to prison again in 2011, suspected of being a ringleader during that summer's riots in Manchester, due to a video depicting him talking to a looter who was carrying a large flat-screen TV on Oldham Street in the height of the riot. Mr. Nunan enjoyed playing cat and mouse with the law, as prison authorities struggled to cope with him. and some prison governors just did not want to have to deal with him as they saw it as a big problem for whoever's custody he was in. There was even a stage where he was housed in the Special Intervention Unit for troublesome prisoners at Strangeways. He was there together with Kieran Psycho Stapleton, a member of the wider Nunan family, who murdered student Anuj Bidvi in Salford, and Clifton Jeter, who committed a gruesome knife murder in Brighton before attacking 2 guards at the Manchester prison. In the summer of 2014, Mr Nunan brought Manchester city centre to a standstill while out of prison on licence, by climbing the city's big wheel in protest at the latest efforts to recall him, gathering more than 1,000 spectators at the time. This drama meant that roads were closed, buses were diverted and businesses had to shut, losing an estimated £10,000 in trade. Furthermore, the council and police leaders were infuriated, and Mr Nunan was charged with causing a public nuisance for his 6-hour disruption 100 feet above the ground, which was later thrown out by the judge, who said that the wrong charge had been laid and that he had suspected the charge had only been made because this offence carried a stiffer sentence than the alternative aggravated trespass. Around this time, one of Mr Nunan's friends, who grew up in the same street in Whalley Range, was his right-hand man for many years. They saw what others had seen for a long time, that Mr Nunan may be a predatory sex offender. He witnessed Mr Nunan surround himself with an entourage of teens who turned up in force for court appearances, and this man began to feel uncomfortable with what he is seeing. Even telling a news reporter as much as on one occasion being asked how he felt. Being a father himself, he fell out with Dominic after a confrontation with Mr Nunan. Some of his descriptions include stating, "I remember this lad, he was 13, Mr Nunan was waiting for him to come home from school. This lad sat on his knee and was told to call him Uncle Dom. He gave this lad a £5. He gave 50p pieces to some other lads. He bought them ice cream." The man also recalls how another lad was 14 and Dom said to call him Dad and he would be kissing him. "I told him he shouldn't be doing that, and he was just out of prison and I told him he shouldn't be doing it. It just wasn't right." Claims from the man state how he believed that Mr Nunan was taking the piss and said that he felt uncomfortable about the situation. He even said he told his children never to be on their own with Mr Nunan. Furthermore, the man said Dom never had a best mate. I wouldn't have put him down as a best mate either, and that when things started falling into place, I thought this isn't just persecution. I just felt very uncomfortable. Him kissing lads who were 13 and 14, it was very, very uncomfortable. It was staring me in the face. Overall, Dominic's actions ultimately meant that his brothers even saw him as an embarrassment, to the point where he even changed his name to Dominic Latterly Footfoy by deed poll, where his adopted surname is an acronym for "Look after those that look after you, F off those that F off you," and that he now faces the punishment for his diabolical crimes, to which his longtime ex-friend says he deserves everything he gets. Lastly, Damien Nunan. There is a lack of information on Damien. However, it is known and accepted by many that he was a key factor in the success and reputation of the Nunan criminal empire. Damien Nunan was known for being the main part of the trio and everyone respected him. He had no trouble organising or taking part in the crimes the brothers and their criminal gang committed within the criminal underworld, and he was known to be very good at cash-in-transit robberies. Although there is a lack of information about what crimes he committed or took part in during his lifetime, Damien Nunan's death played a significant part in the end of the rule of the Nunan brothers over Manchester, which leads us to the end of their empire. During a space of 8 months, the Nunan criminal empire slowly began to crumble, with Damien's death happening in 2004. The respect and trust that the other gangsters had in regards to Damien and his brothers started to deteriorate. Damien Nunan died in a motorcycle accident while on holiday in the Dominican Republic, and on his colossal black and gold headstone, the family inscribed, "Our family chain is broken / nothing seems to be the same." A friend of Damien's, Paddy Doherty, who was also a bare knuckle boxer and TV personality, says the minute Damien died, they weren't half as powerful as they thought they were. He was the gangster of gangsters in Greater Manchester. The influence, fear and respect the family enjoyed on the streets at that time was signalled by the size of Damien's send-off, which had posters that went up in town advertising the arrangements. Hundreds gathered on the streets of Salford where he lived, to watch his coffin being carried on a horse and carriage led by an 18-piece bagpipe band, followed by a wagon full of floral tributes, and a mass was broadcast on PA to those who could not get into the All Souls RC Church in Weast for the service, before burial at St Joseph's Cemetery in Moston. Then, in March 2005, Desmond Nunan also lost his life after being stabbed to death by a crack dealer. At the time, Dessie had been consumed by an out-of-control alcohol and crack cocaine addiction. His killer was Yardie Derek McDoofus, a part-time DJ who was born in Manchester but raised in Jamaica. It was known that the arguments and threats had gone back and forth between the pair, with there being one occasion where Derek told Dessie, "Fuck off, I'll kill you." Many drug dealers have been told by his brothers to not sell drugs to Dessie, so Dessie tried to circumvent this ban by sending his friends to buy the drugs. On the night of March 18th, Dessie drunkenly shambled to get his drugs himself after not finding anyone to go purchase them for him. Mr. McDoofus, who determined to show he was not scared of the bigger man with a dangerous reputation, went out with a kitchen knife and confronted him. A fight broke out with Mr. McDoofus ultimately pushing a knife into Dessie before leaving him in the streets to die. Before his death, Desmond Nunan managed to call his wife and tell her he had been stabbed, hence how he was found bleeding on the pavement from a stomach wound. Following a trial at Preston Crown Court, Mr. McDoofus, then 41, was found guilty of murder and jailed for life with a minimum of 15 years to serve before parole. It was reported that he was battered so badly upon arrival to the station that he was hospitalised for weeks before he could go to prison. It was also thought he might have been permanently segregated from other prisoners. On the other hand, Desmond Nunan was given a big send-off with a 25-piece pipe band, drummers and a horse-drawn carriage, topped with white flowers bearing the coffin, at St Aidan's, Northenden, and then Southern Cemetery, Chorlton in the family tradition. Also in the cortege, 15 black Daimlers filled with red and white floral tributes and wreaths which said, "The Boss," "Uncle," "Our Kid," and "Des," and 2 local schools, St Thomas Aquinas and Chorlton High, closed for the day following police advice about the scale of the event. Dominic commented on this by saying the police totally overreacted, and that Dessie wouldn't have wanted the schools to close, there was just no need. There was a turnout of more than 5,000 mourners. Senior Detective Sean Donnellan, who led the investigation into Desmond Nunan's death, certainly thought there was a cautionary tale in it, saying that Desmond Nunan lived a violent and often illegal life. He had a detrimental effect on many people around him, either directly or by association. He considered himself to be a powerful person within the criminal underworld, declaring himself untouchable to television cameras. Yet he died addicted to drugs, lying on the pavement, having had an argument with a drug dealer. Therefore, there is a sense of irony in the death of this once powerful and dominant gangster. Having experienced the loss of his 2 brothers, Dominic was hit badly by the deaths, and according to the journalist Donald McIntyre, was now a man at sea. His dark secrets of paedophilia had always been suspected by many others, and now Dominic was weaker, having lost the 2 most powerful forces in his life. However, despite his losses, he still managed to exert influence and command loyalty in inner city areas, and become a street provocateur. Due to his reputation, he became confident that his rumours that he abused boys would never come to anything. However, he became so feeble that he was incapable of handling the backlash, or had the power he once had to cover up the allegations, and in 2015 he was jailed for 11 years for arson, blackmail and perverting the course of justice. He now also faces the aftermath of being a paedophile and faces time for his sex offences, which he had denied. Having been convicted of all of them, another 11 years was added to his sentence. Therefore, being the last remaining brother of the trio, he is likely to face the rest of his adulthood behind bars, meaning the Nunan empire has been fully toppled. Overall, the Nunan empire has left its mark on the city of Manchester, due to the notoriety of the brothers. It can be seen how they started in the economic depression of Manchester and fought against the odds to rise, finding a niche in crime, particularly drug dealing, to increase their reputation. From there, they could expand their empire by putting up with rival gangs and even forming relations with the gangsters of other busy cities. Ultimately, their formidable, brutal standing became well known, only for it to all go to pieces after the death of Damien and then Dessie. Dominic, being the only one remaining, was unable to cope with his losses and as a result had to face the punishment of imprisonment for his crimes and paedophilic behaviour.
since there are no longer any Nunan brothers available to rebirth and regrow the empire they once had, it can be said that they were the three brothers who had their peak, ruled much of Manchester and set up a destructive dynasty, the likes of which we are unlikely to ever see again. Their status has even resulted in documentaries such as the one by Donald McIntyre called A Very British Gangster, which even included Desmond Nunan boasting of being behind 27 killings and Dominic saying he was gay. Another programme called At Home with the Nunans features Stephen Warburton, or Bugsy Nunan, alongside his father Dominic. Mr. Warburton had been taped boasting of an Audi A6 he had stolen in a call to a friend serving time, which resulted in his arrest and a jail time of 38 months for being part of a £250,000 car ring conspiracy. Concludingly, it can be seen how although the brothers all came to their demise and their rule of terror diminished, Dominic, Damien and Desi will forever hold a piece of history in Manchester, the town they made their own. The crimes committed by the Nunan brothers will never be forgotten in the UK criminal underworld.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.
Hello, and thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to look at one of the most infamous UK criminal syndicates, known as the Addams family, and how they become one of the most feared and respected families in the UK criminal underworld. The family started out during the 1980s. Terence, Terry George Adams, formed a syndicate with his brothers Thomas, Tommy Sean Adams and Patrick, Patsy, Daniel John Adams as its financier and enforcer respectively. The brothers Thomas and Daniel Adams were born to Irish parents, part of a very large family of 11 children who grew up in Barnsbury, Islington. The syndicate was based in Clerkenwell, while Terry Adams, until his admission of money laundering in 2007, had lived in Barnsbury. The syndicate expanded over the following years to include other members of the Addams family and close childhood friends. A number of the brothers' siblings are understood to have no involvement in the crime though. The Clerkenwell crime syndicate is allegedly heavily involved in drug trafficking and extortion, as well as the hijacking of gold bullion shipments and security fraud. The Clerkenwell crime syndicate has also been linked to 25 gangland murders of informants and rival criminals. In addition to developing alleged connections to Metropolitan Police officials, the Clerkenwell crime syndicate was also stated to have had a British Conservative MP in their pocket at one point. The shooting of the then 68-year-old Mad Frankie Fraser, a former enforcer for the Richardson gang, in July 1991 was said to have been ordered by the Addams family, though Fraser himself said that he had been targeted by rogue police, which could have still been consequently from the Addams family and the Clerkenwell crime syndicate organisation. The Addams family is believed to have connections with various criminal organisations, specifically with South American drug cartels. The BBC has asserted that the Addams family influence has decreased from the year 2000 onwards. Police officers speaking off record to British newspapers have said that the Addams family have been credited with acts that they simply did not carry out, and that this could be true given the number of alleged key gang members killed or imprisoned. However, the Metropolitan Police took the Addams family alleged crimes extremely seriously, especially enough to consider the need to involve a CPS-led team of detectives and the security service MI5 in order to crack the Addams family mafia-like organisation crime syndicate. Thomas Adams was imprisoned for his involvement in money laundering and a drug plot that was described as not having been sanctioned. During an 18-month bugging operation by MI5, Terry Adams was recorded speaking about his brother in very strident terms and suggesting that in 1998 at least, relations between them were kept to a minimum. It's been stated that they have a criminal fortune of up to £200 million. Before Tommy and Terry Adams were convicted in 1998 and 2007 respectively, the failure of the police to secure convictions of the brothers had led Tommy and Terry Adams to believe that they had undermined the justice system and become untouchable. Police, Crown Prosecution Service staff and jurors were said to have been bribed and intimidated, leading to not guilty verdicts against members of the Clerkenwell gang that were said to have been wrong. It's been said that Terry Adams faces severe financial difficulties, having been ordered in May 2007 to repay a whopping £4.7 million in legal aid and prosecution costs of £800,000. Sean Tommy Adams gained high-profile public attention during a trial in 2004, when Sean Adams was described as having attended a meeting in 2002 at the request of the former football international Kenny Dalglish. Mr. Dalglish was a former shareholder in Wilmslow-based sports agency Proactive,
a leading sports management firm headed up by the local businessman Paul Stretford. Mr. Douglas was reported to have hired Sean Adams during a protracted deal to secure Proactive's exclusive management rights to Manchester United and England football star Wayne Rooney, in circumstances where another company claimed to represent Mr. Rooney. In February 2010, a 38-year-old man claiming to be Terry Adams' nephew was convicted in a case known as the Jigsaw murder. The trial revealed that the man, Stephen Marshall, has disposed of 4 bodies for the Adams family. Stephen Marshall was sentenced to at least 36 years in prison. In 2014, Sean Tommy Adams and 13 people believed to be affiliated with the Clerkenwell crime syndicate were arrested in a police operation codenamed Octopod.
Designer watches, 6 shotguns and large sums of money were found in other addresses across the city, with a large concentration of the addresses being in North London. The arrests were linked to a conspiracy to assault, money laundering, fraud and revenue offences. At the time, in December 2014, of the death of a bankrupt businessman, Scott Young, who had been involved in 2013 in a high-profile divorce case, media reports began to circulate that flagged Mr. Young's involvement with Patrick Adams that asserted that Tommy Adams and Michael Adams faced no charges after their arrest earlier in 2014. Terence George Adams was born on the 18th of October 1954 in London. Terence was described as having more recently adopted an almost Gentile persona, buying clothes, inexpensive fabrics and indulging his love of arts and antiques to appear legitimate. But Terence Adams' downfall came with the assistance of MI5 and the Inland Revenue. MI5, in a unique interdepartmental collaboration and the first of its kind after the Cold War ended, played a leading part in the electronic war against organised crime, especially in the UK, and turned its sights on the Adams family and their international criminal cartel. Police and MI5 set up a secret squad to dismantle the Adams family organisation, directed from an anonymous Hertfordshire address inside a secret bunker sited somewhere on the busy Hoddesdon commuter belt into London. Some of the recordings, made over a period of 18 months, suggested that Terry Adams had retired from frontline involvement in the organisation's crimes in 1990. Police sources believe that Terry Adams knew he was being monitored and had stage managed many conversations for the benefit of his own defence. Terry Adams, for example, was allegedly caught on tape in 1998, telling his advisor Solly Nahome that he did not want to be involved with a particular illegal deal that potentially was on the table, because it could affect his legitimate business. The Inland Revenue was suspicious enough to ask Terry to explain how he had amassed his personal fortune, including his £2 million of houses and his collection of valuable antiques. Terry invented a range of unlikely occupations, including jeweller and public relations executive. Transcripts of the surveillance and investigations into several front companies Mr. Adams had set up proved that Terry was lying. But Mr. Adams appeared in court and admitted 4 counts of breaching the order in February and June of 2010. Details of the spending that Mr. Adams has hidden from the authorities were detailed to Westminster Magistrates Court. In January 2011, Terence Adams underwent a pioneering non-surgical facelift at the Harley Street Medical Skin Clinic, which cost £7,500. The stem cell procedure involves injecting fat from the other parts of the body into the face, and was paid for by his sister-in-law Camilla Hicks after the NHS refused to fund it. Other expenditures Mr. Adams has hid from the authorities included membership of an exclusive Hertfordshire country club, £10,000 in solicitors' fees, and £2,200 on a Cartier watch from a police auction. The watch had been confiscated from Mr. Adams, whose North London criminal empire was once valued at £150 million. In the aftermath of his money laundering conviction in March 2007, it was later put up for sale again at police auction. But prosecutor Esther Schutzer-Wiseman said that Mr. Adams had arranged for his wife Ruth to buy the watch back later from the auction, and she eventually handed it to him on his release from prison on licence in June last year. At around the same time, Mrs. Adams converted her membership of the Grove Hotel Spa in Chandler's Cross, Hertfordshire, into a joint membership for her and her husband at an annual cost of £3,460. She also opened a £10,000 client account with Powell Spencer Solicitors to launch a judicial review action over the terms of her husband's release and licence, which was eventually refused. Evidently, this defendant was enjoying the Grove Hotel, said Miss Schultzer-Wiseman. The record management doesn't allow us to know how often he attended, but he certainly went in January and February this year, and on each occasion a booking for at least 2 people was made at the restaurant. These transactions were not detailed in the reports, following a series of letters from the agency warning Mr. Adams about the consequences of non-compliance. He was arrested after attending Charing Cross Police Station by appointment in August. Mr. Adams was immediately recalled to prison, where he stayed until he was due to appear in court. The court heard that Mr. Adams told the SOCA that he did not think he had done anything wrong. Malcolm Swift, QC, representing Mr. Adams, said that he was now a broken man. He is completely paranoid about continuing to be under surveillance by the authorities. When at liberty, he doesn't even drive a car or use a telephone because he is determined nothing should be misconstrued. Mr. Adams was now living on the dwindling capital lawfully saved by his wife from the sale of her half of the Adams mansion in Dukes Avenue, Finchley, North London. But District Judge Quinton Purdy, who imposed 8 weeks jail for the breaches to run consecutively to his 7-year sentence for money laundering, said that he was shrewd and calculating. The judge said, "You willfully and in my judgment arrogantly sought to frustrate the effect of a financial reporting order, well knowing that a significant confiscation order remains largely unpaid." The judge said that Mr. Adams' earliest release date will be December 2013. In March 2017, Mr. Adams lost his appeal against the order to pay £700,000 under the Proceeds of Crime Act. In November 2017, a district judge sitting in Weston-super-Mare ordered Terence Adams to pay the remaining amount within 30 days or return to prison for at least another 2.5 years. In December 2017, Terence Adams repaid the entire confiscation order, around £725,000, despite his repeated claims of poverty. Terence Adams also attempted to gag the press and to stop people from knowing that he in fact repaid the confiscation in full rather than return to jail. A source close to the investigation said that Terry must have found nearly £750,000 down the back of the sofa. In February 2019, media reports suggested that Mr. Adams and his wife were now living in a housing association flat. Later that month, Mr. Adams paid back an additional £50,000 to Westminster Magistrates Court despite claiming poverty to avoid returning to prison for non-payment of court costs. Thomas Sean Adams was born in 1958 in London. He is an alleged financier for his brothers Terry and Patrick Adams. A married father of 4, Thomas Adams still has a home near the family's traditional Islington base, but was understood to be mainly living in Spain before he was jailed in 2017. Thomas Adams was charged with having involvement in the handling of the Brinksmat gold bullion, but in 1985 he was cleared of involvement in the laundering of the proceeds during a high-profile Old Bailey trial with co-defendant Kenneth Noy. Thomas Adams is suspected of establishing connections to other international criminal organisations, including numerous Yardie gangs, as well as gaining an $80 million credit line from Colombian drug cartels. In 1998, Thomas Adams was convicted of masterminding an £8 million hashish smuggling operation into Britain, for which he was jailed for 7 years. At trial, Mr. Adams was also ordered to pay an unprecedented £6 million criminal assets embargo, or face an additional 5 years imprisonment on top of his 7-year term. On appeal, the criminal assets embargo was later reduced by appeal judges to £1 million, largely due to the CPS not having sufficient material evidence, bank accounts or traceable assets to locate and verify his criminal wealth. Thomas's wife, Andrula, paid his £1 million criminal assets embargo in cash just 2 days before the CPS deadline. Mr. Adams was further convicted of money laundering and sentenced to 7 years in 2017, after a number of significant cash seizures of criminal money were linked to him. Money from crime in Manchester was collected and sent to Mr. Adams via trusted associate. Patrick Daniel John Adams was born on the 2nd of February 1956 in London and gained an early reputation in London's underworld by using high-speed motorcycles in gangland murders. Patrick Adams was a suspect in at least 25 organised crime-related deaths over a 3-year period. Patrick was sentenced to 7 years in prison in the 1970s for an armed robbery. Although subordinate to Terry, Patrick, sometimes known as Patsy, has participated in many individual criminal activities. Most notably, Patrick is suspected of the 1991 murder attempt on Frankie Fraser. Also, according to one account, Patrick Adams assaulted Mr. Fraser's son, David Fraser, with a knife, cutting off part of David Fraser's ear during a drug deal. Mr. Adams and his wife Constance Adams were wanted in connection with attempted murder in Clerkenwell, London on the 22nd of December 2013 and were both arrested in Amsterdam on the 7th of August 2015. Patrick admitted to causing grievous bodily harm with intent at Woolwich Crown Court and was sentenced to 9 years in 2016. The members of police who searched Patrick's flat in the days after the shooting found a handwritten note from Mr. Tiernan, who was 54 at the time, which said, "I ain't no effing grass," and urged Patrick Adams, his former friend, to face me. In an interview in 2020, Paul Tiernan stated that Patrick was released from prison earlier in the year. The Adams family has long been connected to the Brinksmat robbery and other criminal individuals who helped sell the stolen gold, including the likes of Kenneth Noy. What are your opinions on the crimes committed and the legacy left by the Adams family? Please let us know what you think in the comments down below. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like and share, and if you're new to the channel and want to see more Street Crime UK content, then don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can join us on the next video. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.